Yep, and we are online.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Elie.
Hi.
Zhenya will come soon, and we are waiting for some viewers because now we just how to say it?
We just went live.
Yes. Oh, yes, we have one viewer, and I think viewers, when you viewers you view us, please type something. Please share us a plus in comments so we can see you and that you are see us. Yes, hello. So somebody see us, and yep. I welcome you in our fourth podcast of Narratorika. Narratorika is an online school of game writing and narrative design. And my name is Masha Kachikova, and I'm a founder of the school and also indie developer, narrative designer, game writer, so on, so on, so on. And today we have a guest, Elie Abraham. Elie, hello.
Hello.
So, please introduce yourself. Tell us something about what are you doing. What's
Absolutely. Yes, that would be my pleasure. So I obviously I work in games. A lot of people in the video game industry actually know me as a musician, but before I was working in the game industry, I was actually working with escape rooms, which was the first time when people asked me to design puzzles and to design narratives and stuff like that. And that ended up kind of bleeding over into my games industry. And I started not just doing audio gigs. And right now, I worked on a game called Dandara, made by a Brazilian team that was shipped earlier this year. And we're currently working on releasing a DLC. So I'm combing through some of the story of the vanilla version of the game and writing all the expansion stuff that we're going to be adding to it. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, thank you. Zhenya, hello.
Hello, sorry, I'm a little bit 1 minute late, even though Elie was the one actually running from the bar. And I was just making tea and lost track of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey Elie, it's nice to see you again.
You too, friend.
Yeah.
Zhenya, yes, I told everything about Narratorika and blah, blah, blah. So I think you should start with our theme and ask first questions and so on.
Yeah, so we are ready to start proper. Okay. So the theme for today, because both me and Elie at Sweden Game Conference in November have given talks that are sort of correlated, even though we have never met before that particular conference.
That's funny.
Yeah, Elie's was about romance in video games, and mine was about accidental propaganda, again in video games. And basically, your talk was a 30-minute version of like 2 minutes that I have put in my talk, but way broader. And we sort of wanted to open a huge can of worms today and talk about narrative ethics in general, like the stuff that we should like sort of check ourselves and to be responsible for society and the game industry in general. Like there is a bunch of stuff that we don't do consciously, and there is a bunch of stuff that we do just because somebody is pressuring us to, and maybe there are some ways to sort of deal with this stuff. Are you okay?
Yes. Sorry.
So yeah, I think like the best place would be like to start from romance, since it's the place that we have both touched on our talks. So let's just give a brief, abridged version of your talk, and what's the biggest problem with romance?
Absolutely. So I'll start by saying this. My greatest concern is obviously the models that we see in media, especially when they're trends. Like not like when I'm thinking like, oh, a single movie that did an interesting idea, but when you notice many games or many films, for example, have the same trope over and over. Let's think of a really cliche one like the damsel in distress. You know, it's a thing we recognize because we've seen it over and over again. And I find that there are models for romance in games that we're seeing over and over again. And when we're doing that, it means we're not teaching the values of that model. And the one that I was mostly critiquing in my talk is called kindness tokens, where you systems and games that allow you to choose who you're going to be romancing. The way in which you make the romance happen is you pretty much just agreeing with whatever the person says and giving them gifts. And then in the end, you get sex or whatever. And we're now teaching that to the players. People are like, there are many people saying like, oh, men are not entitled. There are many people going like, why don't people realize that they feel so entitled? And I'm like, we're literally giving them games that allow them to be like, I'm such a nice guy, and they give me sex in the end. But that's not how romance works in the real world. And so I'm worrying that we're literally teaching toxic behaviors to the players, and that because we've done this in so many games. I named AAA titles like Dragon Age and Mass Effect, but even in indie titles like Stardew Valley, because we've done that over and over again, we are like actually giving people a space in which they can repeatedly practice and engage a behavior that would be toxic in the real world. But when it's become so commonplace in our media, it becomes dangerous because people start to essentially, I guess, mirror it in the real world.
Hmm. Yeah, that's basically the media cycle. Media just normalizes things, and
Mhm.
they just sort of happen. Yeah, it's fine to do that. All my heroes are doing this sort of way. And there is actually one example from Emily Grace Buck actually told it on the podcast with Falcon Brothers for Batman for the last episode of season 2, I think, where they added like Catwoman and Bruce Wayne romance, and in a week of their real time, you can say as a Bruce Wayne, "I love you" to Catwoman, and Catwoman will just deny you anything because
Mhm.
like, dude, we met like a week ago.
Yeah,
And there
yeah,
was a certain uproar on the forums, which is a story that I quite like because why would there be an uproar? It's absolutely normal behavior, but it's just something that we are trained to. It might be right now something that just players expect from the video games, but it might be normalizing in every other way.
yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned like, oh, all my heroes are doing it. And in my talk, I was like, look at Indiana Jones, look at James Bond, and these are people that I watched in films when I was growing up. And I look back on those same films, which I loved growing up, and I'm like, ooh, I don't think this is okay anymore, actually, you know?
Hmm.
So, in my talk, the examples were James Bond and Indiana Jones, but obviously what I'm saying now is this is still perpetuating.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, it's been perpetuated. And then I gave the example of games that are starting to get in on the trend. And I think it's dangerous to the players. And obviously, I wanted to see romance in games to start to feel more relatable to my actual experiences with romance in the real world, because I don't think that you can just be nice to someone and get them gifts, and that inherently equals attraction, you know.
Hmm. Well, we'll see when my diamond for you comes into next mail. Yeah, there's actually was a good example for once, Expeditions Vikings, which is kind of an obscure game from Denmark about, well, Vikings.
Hmm.
And there was a bit of the romance was sort of never advertised in any way. You just sort of have your herd, as in herd, the Danish word, not the actual ships and stuff, but with your people, and almost every character has that sort of bit of story to them, and also the timeline is very different. Like in Mass Effect, it's usually like happens in a month or so. Like it's
Yeah.
very condensed. So is Dragon Age, and there they have like 12 months span. And during that month, like on month like 5 or 6 or 7, there is just a scene that props with just a dialogue that you sort of talk through, and then there might be a prompt which just starts the sexual relationship, which
Mhm.
can then explored into like which isn't like the end goal, but just the beginning of the relationship. Which again, you're like. You're traveling in a squad. You're tight packed. You've been killing English people for a long, long time. It's 700s. That's what Vikings did, and suddenly, like, there is a spark, and there is a spark that comes from rivalry with one of your herdmen, who like is technically the heir for your place, and you sort of use the sex to diffuse the situation, and then it's sort of there is a possibility to grow. There is just a sudden happening which sort of like completely pass by, but it's also felt way more real than any other pieces of Dragon Age, like a Dragon Age encounter or something like that, where it's just basically, yeah, I do this thing for you, and that's it.
That's actually another, you said another interesting thing just then, and that's actually about the timeline of relationships. I've always been kind of blown away negatively about by the fact that when you get married or when you have sex with your, romance option or whatever it always comes at the end of the game. Like, you've been waiting for this. Here's the cutscene. And I was like, but isn't the most interesting part of a relationship obviously everything after when it started? It's like the moment you got there, that character will move into your home and you don't have to talk anymore. It's
Hmm.
like, so your in-game partner is legitimately just a trophy. Whereas for me, the most fascinating opportunities for romance in a story come once the relationship has started. Now it's like, all right, we're together now. How's this relationship going to pan out? And that is like a video games have missed that opportunity time and time again. They throw very little nod to the fact that you are in a relationship.
Hmm.
Sometimes the ending cutscene has this one part where someone will come run by your side, something small like that. But I'm saying
Hmm.
like that should really actually be a big chunk of the narrative. Like, oh, the player decided to have a relationship with this person. Let's see how that gets weaved into the entire narrative that we have here. But I think oftentimes it's simply a matter of writers not really caring about that part of the game. Or maybe I'm wrong. It depends on the project, obviously. So
Yeah. Well, it could be a lot of priorities, I think. It might be writers just not caring, and this is just not the stuff, not the focus of the game.
mhm,
And
mhm.
of course, it's harder. It involves a lot of talking in general and a lot of
Yeah,
variables that you have to track. Like, of course, like the first idea that happens in mind, like how to show the romance afterwards, is just the how the cohesion builds up between your, like, even in like RPG and turn-based strategies or whatever. It's just there are two characters that are in a relationship. They just understand each other better. For instance, they come to each other's aid. That's a mechanical help, and this is very much game design and what players would love. But it's also quite hard to implement. Way more harder than just a cutscene, I'm assuming.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it always can be the priority from the producer side, which is sort of like, which is why the narrative ethics is the stuff that I want to call upon, because for the big companies, for the producers, for even for the small companies where they're just a producer and game designer, somebody in the lead, they might not have this particular thing in their priority. So, in my opinion, we should kind of take the lead on this part and
That's fair.
be more ethical,
Mhm.
because like to sort of like show why we should care in this regard. And in romance, it's kind of new, sort of like a basically Baldur's Gate and BioWare have championed this stuff in RPGs specifically.
Yeah.
I don't mean like Max Payne or more cinematic where there's just a romantic interest, although that's a whole other can of worms.
But the system where the romance is optional, and there's
Yeah.
like a whole system around how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's usually done with the kindness tokens because they're the easiest to implement.
Mhm.
Even though probably like the system of flags, sort of, where it just that did something that they don't like, and this just overall there's like a built-in sort of admiration, and then you can, like, if in a relationship, yeah, it should start from admiration or from sexual tension,
Mhm.
and then it's just at some point you either release it or you missed completely the timeline. But then again, for video games, this is in current situation, this is just weirder to implement. Like it feels weird for the players because they don't not expecting this particular behavior, which is also like a good point, is that just players are basically the only ones that dictate what we will be doing. Essentially, producers and big companies, they always look for the average player.
Right. That's super true. Um, because they're looking for that median and that's so much of their player base is like another reason why I'm like, all right, so we should show them something
Hmm.
that I don't want to say, because for me I'm like, show me some more substance or whatever, but like you said, not everybody necessarily wants that, or it's not necessarily the point of the game. Which, so when
Hmm.
I say to people, I'm like, put more effort into your romance, I understand when people are like, hey, this is really not like the point of the game. Then take it out. You can't,
Hmm.
because I think it's irresponsible to leave it the way that it is. But if you want to include that in the game, then put some back into it, essentially. And
Hmm.
I during my talk I even recommended, I'm like, you might want to hire people who specifically handle that part of the narrative. If you think like,
Hmm.
oh, it's going to require so much this and so much that, well then get people who are going to handle that specifically, or genuinely consider taking it out of your game, because
Hmm.
like I just said, the way it stands right now, I feel is genuinely irresponsible, and that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, true.
maybe uh, devil's attorney. Uh, a year
Devil's
ago.
advocate.
Yes, okay. A year ago, I was in your position, Ellie.
Mhm.
Uh, I was on a round table about ethics and games, and we spoke about the stuff when mm, did or is we really do we really uh, how to
You can
say
do
it?
it.
I can't do it. I know. I practiced. I practiced. I forget all the words. Sorry, but I will remember them. Games and real life. Okay, and do games really uh, inflect or
Affect.
correlate correlate
Mhm.
with real life? Because there are some studies about games that we don't really behave in real life like we behave in games. Why we really bother about our behavior in games? Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe it's simpler.
I'd say there's actually multiple things to say about that, but that's a really good point. One is that our behavior in games, um, you could, like, my devil's advocate to what you just said, it would essentially be like, well, some people are acting the way they are in games because they know they can't in real life. And games are a space that allows you to do things you're not allowed to do in the real world. Um, and but the values of the games, like for example, there's a lot of killing in games. That's because we value violence in the real world, and that's also a problem. For example, another thing I would say is it's not just about like, oh, because I've said a lot about it not being ethical and not being worrisome to me, but also because it's not relatable to me, it's more boring. They're worse games. Like a romance that spoke to my actual experience would be a much more interesting part of a video game. I would be much more into a story like that. I would like the game more. So what I'm saying now is we're doing a stale thing over and over again. So we're kind of locked ourselves in this circle of just making a shitty part of games that have so many other great things going for them. And
Mhm.
this is like the one of the main things that I'm like, when I look back on those games, I'm like, yeah, but this part could be way better. It could be way more interesting. They left me hanging. It fell flat, and I want to see games get better at this. So it's not just a matter of me thinking like, oh, we're teaching shitty values to the players, which I do feel. But on top of that, I'm like, the game is worse. This is something we can follow through with to make better games.
It's also a part of this conversation is not video game specific. It's video the usual criticism for video games is of course violence, and movie industry has also went through violence
Yep.
because like there's a bunch of violence in movies too, and they have also been criticized. For example, Bechdel test. It arrived from the movie industry when they suddenly just realized that the only role for I think it's like 50s or 60s that the only role for a woman would be like either femme fatale or a good wife or a child or
Yeah.
something like that.
Or just the person who dies in the beginning to give the male character like a reason to do whatever he's doing, you know?
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
basically a talking MacGuffin.
Yeah, yeah.
And through that conversation, they created way broader spectrum of movies and what can be done. And in video games, it's also like it's kind of way easier to do combat than say romance, because romance would include a loads of talking or a very good direction, so that if you do it without completely with dialogue, but you have to do some conversational, but we don't have proper good working interfaces. Only Inkle games, as far as I know, are working on this stuff. We don't have proper dialogue. Writing dialogue in video games is still worse than in most of the movies, especially if you give like we give a lot of branching for sure, but it isn't necessarily as impactful and precise as movie dialogue. And it's just in general we don't use the non-violent tropes as like video. Like for example, you can't do a video game where basically you're just sitting in a room and you just four people talking to each other and it all deteriorates into chaos, but without violence. You can do it, of course, in the indie scenario, but you can't do it in the big games, in the AAA scenario, because like it will have a sort of a very niche audience by itself.
That's true too. So when we're thinking, especially about we use the example like I use the example of Mass Effect, Dragon Age, blah blah blah. These are the AAA titles, and they are definitely thinking about like well, obviously their business
Hmm.
and who their player base is. Um, I'm wondering if amongst players, like, because I know how I feel, I know how my friends feel, but how big is the cry from the average player to see what I'm describing, or is it the thing they didn't even know they needed?
Hmm.
Guys, I think there is a whole genre now, very popular, like choices and episodes
Hmm.
uh, on mobiles, about romance, and they became more and more popular. What do you think about them?
Do you like games like what Telltale has made, or maybe like visual novels,
No,
or
sort of chatbots. They're kind of chatbots. You just receive like a text. Sort of like the main game screen is like a text messenger,
yeah?
and you like have some, and it just the story conveys through you to you through the text, and you can affect it in some ways. But it's mostly like mimicking the mobile phone.
Like
Oh,
Lifeline, but with romance mostly.
oh, that's quite interesting. I played a jam game like that once. It was called I think it was called Sext Adventure, and you start messaging someone, and then you have some agency to turn it into a sexual conversation. And I thought that was quite interesting to see that get explored. And I'm not familiar with the kinds of games that you're describing right now, but that might be something that's interesting in the same way that I thought this jam game I just described was interesting, where I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, because it can also flop, like nothing comes out of it. Or you can start to put it in this more sexual direction where it's like, yeah, what are you thinking? Like this whole kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that's interesting, especially because that's relatable. Many of us have actually had those conversations. And that feels real. Like obviously I can't imagine, people sexting in Dragon Age or whatever, because these are such fantastical worlds. So we have to find different
Hmm.
ways of like skinning that kind of exchange. But as someone who did play a game that was made to make it seem like I was just on my phone or whatever, um, it was interesting. I'd be more interested to see things like that get explored. I think there's a bunch of games right now that are trying to pull off the whole like, oh, like when you open up the game, it looks like it's just the home screen of your phone. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you've played Sarah is Missing or anything like that, but these are games that when you open them, you just see the homepage of a phone. So it's supposed to look like your phone is the phone in the game or whatever. And
Hmm.
so if I were to play a romance game like that, and it's trying to make it seem like it's really happening in my phone, that is something that I don't know many games like that. And if there are games you want to like suggest for me to try out, I would try them out, but I think it's interesting as an avenue to explore.
Hmm. Yeah, choices and episodes are basically this stuff. They have several focuses. They have focus on romance, and they have focus on horror, of course.
Mm.
Because what else would you do with the text? But yeah, and of course, like visual novels in this regard, also helpful. Like what's Christian Love's Lady Killer in a Bind, and her system of her dialogue system is actually really really robust. It's fantastic, and it actually allows for text-based interruption of people, which you don't, which is quite hard to implement.
Oh, totally. That's pretty neat. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Oxenfree did it with voiceover, but voiceover is different because it has the natural continuation when you interrupt somebody. But Christian Love did that with a visual novella setting and using mostly text. She actually gave a talk about that here in Germany, and it was super interesting. And I got her blessing to steal this shit, and almost everybody got her blessing for that.
That's funny. Those games too, like visual novels, I think they're written off most of the time. Like, oh, those trashy visual novel things.
Hmm.
But And so most of the time, I'm not quite interested in them either. But I have found, especially with like Hate Up Full Boyfriend and Dream Daddy, that there's actually room to not stick to all the tropes of visual novels. There's actually room to do a lot more, and it's kind of cool to see people trying to make visual novels that actually do see some success or are popular for whatever reason, I'd be interested to see more visual novels try to do the things that those games did that made them resonate with people such that they had any popularity. Because there's a million and five like Japanese student goes to high school kind of games, et cetera, et cetera. Dream Daddy did something new, definitely did something new, which is super cool.
Mhm.
Had a Full Boyfriend was really funnily delivered, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm interested to see um, if like how much more we can push that essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, Dream Daddy also good. I quite liked it because it's always like visual novella with mini games.
Yeah.
Which also like spreads its appeal to more people.
Yes.
Like you just see
That's
Let's
what
Play,
it's
and
not
suddenly
just
you are using, yeah, you're suddenly just using your girl as a Pokemon to like your daughter to like fight another dad and like competing like whose daughter is greater.
that
It was
is
also like actually fantastic mechanization of the natural interaction between people. Because it's basically like, yeah, whose daughter is best, which is also relatable. We all know a parent who acts this way or something like that.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was immediately okay. This game is more than just visual novel. I want to check this shit out.
Yeah, that was a very, very cool thing they did. So clearly, one of the things that's cool about what Dream Daddy did was it showed us like, hey, there's more doors to open.
Mhm.
So yeah,
What do you think about Florence?
I loved Florence. I thought Florence was great. I did a TEDx talk in Warsaw about a month and a half ago, and I think Florence was one of the games I gave a shout out to, being like, "Hey, I was saying like maybe you're interested in comedies, maybe you're interested in romances, and things like that. So you're interested in romances? Check out this game called Florence, especially because Florence is very accessible. It's the kind of game you can sit down and play it right there and then from beginning to end. The mechanics were very well designed." Um, the flow of the game was very good. I loved that it didn't end with like and they lived happily ever after. It also didn't end either with like and it was shit, like it showed like, oh, this is what a first love is like and you can heal from it too. And of course it's going to seem dark and there's good times and there's bad times, and there were so many things put in there. It was just very sweetly done. And the representation was good. It was honestly, I think, for what considering what it was, the delivery was very good. I really praise Florence for how well they did the thing they were trying to do.
And they got a bunch of awards on the last Game Awards. They got the best mobile, I think. And actually, almost all of the games in best mobile they were narrative-driven games, which is also a very interesting trend.
Right?
It might
It's
it
that's
just
incredible.
It's actually kind of weird point because mobile audience is way more broader. Like an average mobile player is way more abstract than an average PC or console player.
Mhm.
But they are going through romance, even though mostly like they were all going for the free to play like just 3 years ago, and
Yeah.
Device 6 was mostly an
Life
outlier.
Story was all we were playing, like.
Mhm.
But
Which is kind of a weird point.
are you familiar with I actually have it on my phone. I think it's called A Dark Room. Have you played A Dark Room?
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
um, a dark room is very interesting because it seems like it has an almost clicker game-esque mechanic, but the more you get into it, the more you realize how important the narrative is and how the narrative really drives the tone and feel of the game. And in playing it, I realized like, wow, it has like the package of mobile games that we're more used to seeing, but it also showed how much room there is for narrative games or narrative components in mobile games. And I don't think most people thought of phones as being like for narrative games. But
Mhm.
there are a lot of games that showed like narrative games can actually be delivered quite well on mobile. We just have to be aware of the fact that the context in which people play mobile games is usually different, and what people might be looking for when they do play these games. But earlier, I referenced, for example, a game called Sarah is Missing, and you open it up and it looks like you're holding somebody else's phone. That's how it's made. And this woman named Sarah is missing, and you have found your phone. And now it starts off like, oh, how do I get her phone back to her? But then what you realize is, ooh, something awful has happened to her,
Mhm.
and it becomes this horror story, which again you can play in one sitting. It might be like even just half an hour long or something. But I was very impressed by how it was delivered. And there's so many things, so many immersive decisions they made. Like you get a call in the game at one point. And so when I say that, you're like, how do they pull that off? Because you can't talk to the person. So what happens is you get this call and you're thinking like, oh, what do I do? The person on the other end can't hear you. He's like, are you there? Like, hello? And it was just so cleverly done, how immersive it was. And I was thinking like, wow, so many neat things we're able to do with narrative, especially on mobile. So people might actually be writing off mobile as an opportunity for narrative games more than they should, because I've seen a few games that really surprised me. Um, so anyway, just saying that like it's quite interesting because we're some of the games we mentioned, obviously they're all like they're not mobile games, but I think there's a lot of mobile games worth putting the lens over, or that some people who want to make narrative games should consider mobile as an option for.
Yeah, I think actually there is a problem that just mobile is sort of written off. Like I would sort of shy away from anything mobile on account of being terrified of doing match 3 ever again.
Yeah.
And so it just gets the bad rep, but also the market there might be so saturated that now narrative is just sort of like the stuff to look for, even for the players.
That's interesting.
Just something different. And to be fair, like if you're just using the phone, you mostly read stuff, or you're like using the Instagram, and this is just the audio-visual representation. Even Reigns basically just stepped into the Tinder.
Right. Mechanic. Yeah, that's a very great example. Reigns literally took an app everybody recognizes, and then like, I can't say gamified it because it was already gamified. They just like reskinned it in a more game way.
Yeah.
It's maybe people should perhaps even be looking towards the apps we are already using as for more direction for how to make games, which, like I said, with Sarah is Missing, for example, or I think it's often just abbreviated as Sim. You open it up and it's just like looks like your phone, and that's what's interesting about it. It has apps. You can check the messages, you can check the emails, and all that kind of stuff. So Reigns is like, oh, you want to play Tinder, but not really, So it's quite funny. It's also telling about what people actually get out of Tinder. Like people play it for the gamification of it.
Guys, we have a question. How would you show romantic relationship development without a text?
Without text?
Eyes. Adjust the direction of who people are looking at.
So, well, first of all, Florence didn't have any text, or like rarely any text, rather. So that's already like a good example right there. That's actually one of the reasons why I loved Florence so much, because, for example, when they argue, the mechanics. Oh my God! All you do is you're creating like a jigsaw speech bubble, but the way the way it happened, it like felt like you were in the middle of an argument, and like you were trying to like, I got to get in what I'm trying to say before what they're trying to say. Even there was no text in the speech bubbles, but you could still feel that they were arguing, and that was really, really clever design. So obviously, you could sit in a room with someone and say nothing verbally to them, but still have a lot of communication. It's like when you see something in public and then you notice somebody else saw it too, and you look at each other and then you both laugh because you realize you both just saw that thing. So there's so many ways to show any kinds of conversation without actual words. I think people should think about those moments, those moments where you try to look. It's like how when someone tells a joke, there's this cliche thing where they say, you can tell who likes who, because when someone tells a joke, you're most likely to look at the person you like and to see if they're laughing as well. Not even necessarily to check, do they find this funny? But you just have this, like, you want to see their reaction as well. And that is an example of ways in which we interact with other people non-verbally, and we don't even think about it. But if you were to put that into a game, people would recognize it. They would realize. That's why in movies they show somebody's face and they show like some person going like this, someone else, then they show the other person doing the exact same thing, and in that moment we recognize they are like communicating with each other. They are noticing each other. They're aware of each other. That's a kind of communication that required no actual words.
Yeah, that's actually like we use our eyes to direct our attention, and romantic relationship is basically the attention management in many ways.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Like you were able to tell in Florence that she was attracted to the guy, like because he's busking, he's playing music in public when she sees him, and all of a sudden she starts to float. and she's like going towards the sound of the music, and you realize she's captivated by it. She's like, "What's that sound? I need to know where it's coming from." And then she chases it, and she sees this guy essentially, and that's kind of introduces him to the relationship, etc. Or I think then she sees him, but then she runs into him again at a later point, and the relationship starts to develop. But when it had her literally floating in the air towards the music, you realize she was captivated by the thing he was doing. So that's just an example of one way where the show that they are telling, like, this is what's happening in the narrative here, without actually having to say, and then she heard the sound and was smitten by the boy. Like they didn't have to say any of that. They didn't have to have any text. But we knew. We knew. The moment we saw it, we
Yeah.
knew what was going on.
Yeah, metaphor is always going the long way, and also you could do. I like this exercise. You can do it with like heartbeat sound, just by attaching like skipping a beat or something like that.
Or imagine how I said, like, oh, she started floating towards him. What if she was walking towards him, but you hear a heartbeat, but it's getting more intense. And when she
Yeah.
finally sees him, you can see her go like this, and the heartbeat is going at its fastest. There's all these players are going to go like, oh, I realize what's happening here. She is smitten with him, and I can tell because they put hearts in her eyes. Oh, they made me literally hear her heartbeat. They made her float and smile. All these, those are things. I'm not saying these are the ways you have to do it. I'm just saying these are the ways I've seen it done in games that I know are recognizable to people. It's why the emoji of the smiley face that has hearts for eyes, you realize what they're saying, even though it's just a smiley face with different shaped eyes. You realize what the message is there.
Yeah.
Like emojis are actually a really, really great example of how to communicate without words, because a lot of people are doing that now.
Actually, conversation with text in general, like would you use the punctuation? Would you start with a capital letter? Would you end with a period or not? It's also like there is a lot of unspoken rules and language dependent unspoken rules, which is super interesting. Like I've talked with in Russian sort of text speech, we use the closing bracket, closing circular bracket as a smile usually,
Right.
and in American they don't use it, but they also don't put period unless this is something serious. And there was a lot of miscommunication just based on our use of punctuation. Also,
Especially today, when textual communication was really starting to become popular, like SMSs, Facebook Messenger, all this kind of stuff, they just started to do a lot of studies about it. And some people were like, well, studies show that a lot of the message is actually lost in text messages when you can't see the other person's face. But the new generations decided to adapt to that. That's one reason why emojis became a thing. And that's why punctuation can now tell you the tone of the message. People had to find ways to express those things. It's why sending GIFs is become a very popular thing. And it's funny how someone can say, I'm not sure, ... question mark. And you realize that they're saying, I'm not sure in that way, because it ended with ... question mark, even though it's not a question. So these are things we do to indicate our tone. And punctuation, they're just symbols, just like the emojis. So there's so many. Oh, there's a game called Spit Kiss, a really interesting game that came out this year called Spit Kiss. And they actually use a lot of recognizable emojis that you've seen before to tell a romantic story. It's a very, very cleverly designed game. And it's a polyamorous story. So someone falls in love with someone, but then falls in love with someone else. And then what's interesting is it's not going, look, people can love each other. What it's actually showing is these people don't know what to do. They're in this tense situation where someone is being loved by two people, and the two people are mad at each other because they love the same person. And then they're thinking maybe polyamory is the solution to it. And I haven't actually completed the game, but that's how that's a bit of what I've been able to see. But an interesting thing they do is at the end of every level, there's an emoji that's supposed to help show you how the story is progressing. And then in between the chapters, there's a small comic scene. But it's very interesting because this game is clearly a puzzler, but clearly also a romance narrative without any text. So I think that would be a very great game to look at if you're trying to think how are they telling stories without text or without verbal stuff. Spit Kiss. It came out this year, and it's quite clever as a puzzler. And the way they told the story was also quite clever. So very impressive for anyone who's interested in puzzle games, anyone who's interested in romantic narratives. Those are both totally in there.
And
actually, to some point, I have a.
sorry.
Yes.
Elie, you An example I heard myself. Okay, you had an example in your talk about Shadow of Colossus,
Yes, that's true.
and I think this is a good example too, about story about romance without text, only in mechanics.
You're right. This guy, so the in the intro sequence, this character is carrying someone all the way to this temple, and then he lays her down. And it's amazing that you kind of already realize, all right, there's a deep connection here. And the woman is deceased, and then the game is like, all right, well, if you want to bring her back, you have to slay all these colossi. And then you spend the entire game sacrificing yourself because you have to kill these colossi. And slowly as the game is going on, you start to realize, oh, every time I do that, my character gets a little more sick. And it's not obvious at first, so it's a little bit of a spoiler. But you realize every time you slay one of the colossi, your character gets more sick. And I realized the bond between the two characters because this person is literally willing to like
Hmm.
end himself, to bring so much sickness and suffering into his life to bring her back. And the kind of voice of the godlike voice you're hearing is going, isn't the rule of humans that you can't bring people back? So you're like willing to go into the sacred lands to do this sacrilegious thing and to suffer yourself to bring her back. And that's how, and they never really get to kind of interact in the game, like, so I was like, wow, this person went so far, and that tells you how strong their connection is. And I believe it was stronger because there was no dialogue between them. Like
Hmm.
all of it was unspoken. They just showed it to you. They didn't get to ruin it with like crappy dialogue.
Yeah.
So Shadow of the Colossus, not a game that's normally thought of when talking about romance, but I think actually a very excellent example of how we can show a powerful romance, even in a game that's not otherwise known for being romantic.
And actually, the finale is not a happy end in this game. It's a kind of also has a sort of a commentary on putting yourself through so much strain, so much suffering for probably a goal that is not achievable in any way.
The game ends in a big question mark because in the
Hmm.
end, you ask, so what's going to happen? And then there's this big ending sequence, and then you're like, so what happened? like what happens to her now? Like you still have that
Hmm.
question. And it's really. I just played Greece, which just came out, and one of the amazing things I like about that game is that it ends similarly, where it doesn't tell you really like where she goes, but you don't have that question. And that was a very, very beautiful thing. The game is not at all about romance, but I was amazed by how they ended up not like you finally get to the thing, but they don't tell you what it is, but it doesn't feel unsatisfying in any way at all. Um, and I'm not going to say it was unsatisfying in Shadow of the Colossus, but like you said, it wasn't like the happily ever
Hmm.
after. You are just kind of like, so now what?
Hmm.
Like he did all of that and this, you know?
Yeah, but
So
it's sort of, are they back together now in other form? They sort of narrative superposition. They are at the same point. They are back together as like a baby and this reborn woman, or is it just basically two parts of this dark god, and it's the same thing at the same time in your head? It's
yeah,
actually
I was like,
beautifully done.
I was thinking to myself, this is some weird Greek myth coming together right now
Hmm.
with this, like, oh, but he became her child in the end, or I don't even know what is it that happened.
Hmm.
So it
And
was quite.
how did she get pregnant at the same point? Like there's a huge amount, like a macro consumption, but then immediately it's shit. The art of ending a story is so lost in video games. It's because basically like the Shadow of Colossus is kind of like the end of The Sopranos. It's also ambiguous, and it's also leaves you like experiencing two of the endings at the same time, and it's done beautifully. But we don't have any focus on that, so we don't research these situations. Like endings in general, they're a whole different beast. They're outside of the scope of the podcast, I'd say. To get it back,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that we have been discussing from mobile games and these text games, the visual novellas, these are the relatable situations of sorts. So I can't help but think why, for example, say Mass Effect 1,
Yeah.
Mass Effect 1 or 2, right? Why they don't use a breakup as a story moment, like actual breakup or jealousy?
So they sort of do, but not in a good way. in the second one, if you take certain decisions, and I mentioned that briefly in my talk, if you want to romance Samara in the
Mhm.
second Mass Effect, something is clearly developing, and there isn't a breakup, but she does kind of say like, "Oh, Shepard, I can't have this thing," and then you almost share a kiss, but then it gets confusing, and that's kind of it. Then they just end it right there because you realize you can't sleep with her, you're not going to get with her, so they just don't follow it up. And I'm like, no, that was an awesome opportunity to show how the breakup affected you or the squad and the story of the game. There were so many cool things they could have done there. So I was very disappointed with how they left me hanging.
Mhm.
But they did, I was like, they did start to lead at least in that direction, which would have been a very interesting narrative. So, like you said, yeah, breakups or romances that don't end up well. I mean, we see that in movies all the time. You know, in the rom-coms, they meet together, but then she finds out in the end that he only asked her out in the first place because his friend bet that he couldn't, and then she's like, "You don't even really care about me." And he's like, "No, no, no, I do love you, babe. I'm not even thinking about the bet anymore." You know, like some crap like that. You know, something happens, they're drawn apart, and then they come back together. And in video games, it's more like kindness tokens, sex, and then it's over.
Mhm.
Um,
I can't help but imagine, like, so yeah, with Samara, it's a good example, but also Samara is basically a throwaway character in Mass Effect 2. They just give it give it to you.
literally can throw her away. Actually,
Yes, and you can
you can
choose her
swap her
sister.
for her daughter. Yeah,
Oh yeah, and
yeah.
with the daughter, although with the daughter, it's quite a beautiful thing. She just basically everybody tells you she will kill you, but you just go with it anyway, and she kills you. Also an interesting point. But imagine like going with Miranda and sleeping with Jack at the same time. I don't remember if it's actually possible in Mass Effect. And then you go for a mission and you take both of them, and they talk. And then in the middle of the mission, one of them realizes what's happening, and they hate each other's guts, as far as I remember.
I had no
And
idea.
and
Because
then
I don't know if I've taken them both. Tell me what happens. Yeah.
no, it can't be done, as far as I know.
Oh,
It's
it
just
can't be done.
yeah,
But
as
if
far
it
as I
happens,
yeah, like imagine how
that would be
dramatic
so
this
cool.
situation would be. Like you're in a mission, you're fighting those people, and suddenly like the whole situation just changes because Miranda wants to shoot Jack, and Jack is basically like wants to destroy everything. They did it kind of in Mass Effect 1, not with the Romans, but with Rex, the best character in all Mass Effect.
Yeah.
And they did it on that base that solved how did you call it, genophage, I think.
Yes. Yes. Hypothetical.
Yeah, and then he just takes an issue with you destroying the cure for genophage, even though the Saren is responsible, and you can kill Rex, or Rex can be
Right.
shot.
Exactly. So you have to choose to save him or not, and it also depends, I think, a bit on like your Paragon points or whatever. But it's an
Mhm.
opportunity for you to potentially lose Rex. He turns around with his gun. He goes, "I don't know, Shepard." You know, he's like, "Rex, we're on the same side." He's like, "Are we?" You know,
Mhm.
and everybody pulls their guns out. Yeah, I remember that scene. And then you try to convince him, like, "Listen, the Krogan will be a slave race if you go
Mhm.
with this." And that's one of the ways where he goes, "You're right." You know, but there's a
Yeah.
chance to lose him there.
Mhm.
Um,
And also there's a timer because Ashley will just shoot him at some point,
right. Right.
and it would be a logical sort of a logical development for Ashley being kind of racist and like basically a soldier in this situation. Somebody is deserting. It's very much a character drama, and they also but again, if you care for Rex, you will try, do your best, and reload your save to save him. But if you
Yeah.
don't care about Rex, then yeah, dude, you're just deserter, get shot. Sort of in the same way that Ashley and Caden Alenko, although that one I don't think is handled well, because as far as I know, nobody had any issue. They always the last like who will stay on this particular planet and take care of the bomb.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, nobody had any question about who will they save. It was always like, yeah, you choose your romantic interest, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There was no debate, even though the seat of the debate was kind of there.
Every time I took, yeah, you're right. You're right. It didn't actually feel difficult.
Yeah,
Every time I was like, oh, Caden, because Ashley's racist, like like or like xenophobic. I was like,
yeah.
that's no problem for me at all. But I wanted to go back a bit to what you were saying about Jack and Miranda, because that's the kind of thing I really want to see get explored in games. Like, what if you're in a fight and they start to realize what's going on. So they stop shooting the enemy, and now it's only you. That's how it could pan out gameplay wise. They start shooting each other maybe, and they never actually do damage to each other. You just see their shields going down, and occasionally you hear Shepard going like, "Stay focused on the mission," or whatever, or something like that. And after like a minute of doing that, they kind of come back, and maybe there's like a tense point of like, we'll talk about it on the ship. And then when you get back on the ship, there's a cutscene where you see them fighting, because there is a cutscene with Jack and Miranda fighting. But what if it had been about this?
Yeah.
And I would have been so interested in seeing them like argue mid-mission about it. And gameplay, some people would be like, oh, but that's frustrating. So gameplay-wise, be like, okay, well then just let them check out for about 30 seconds where they can't really get killed by the enemy maybe in that time, but you see them shooting each other and fighting. And then Shepard has to handle all the enemies by himself for the next minute or whatever. That would have been a very low-key, easy way to do a very cool thing.
And it would also be a nice consequences for you basically, playing around. Like, yeah, this shit brings consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And also they could do it in like just for the sake of pacing. People usually do like a corridor where nothing happens, and they usually put some dialogue there. And this is the perfect place to like, Shepard just we talked about it when he left my room. Left fucking what? Literally, what? Yeah, and then you start like an actual fight. And plus, with specifically with Jack, I'm assuming if she just goes all the way, there is a choice of like to subdue her non-violently somehow. I think there is a lot of opportunities to just stun a person, or you can just like, there is no other way. Jack is basically a super-powered machine that just destroys everything. That is like her power. This is her appeal as a companion.
What if that's her moment where she says, I knew it. This is what I told you. I knew this would happen. I told you everyone always tries to, you just need a shorter knife the more you trust someone. Like that would have been the perfect opportunity, because she's a very traumatized character. And that is like an opportunity for that to come out showing itself as a problem, Because even when you try to bring Grunt, Shepard can say, it's like, oh, Cerberus is very strict about the regulations of opening, aliens, blah, blah. And you can say, he's either an asset to the team or a ticking time bomb. I'd rather deal with it now than later. That's the actual line. And you could show an opportunity for Grunt to become a ticking time bomb, which is what happened with Rex when they get to Vermeer. So that was like another thing they mixed. All they really show is Grunt wanting to go to Chunka or whatever, to do the right, or etc. And I thought like it's like a shame that they try to give you this idea that like, hey, it's going to be dangerous to open up this thing, and it isn't at all. I mean, there's a cutscene where he slams you against the wall, but they don't actually show him threatening you or your mission in any way as it goes on. And it would have been cool if they did, especially if you don't do his like loyalty mission or something,
Yeah, and the loyalty mission is just usually the reward for this part is also usually gameplay mechanic, some sort of like in the case of Mass Effect 2, this person will not die at the last mission,
right?
And like this is kind of like it's always tied to some gameplay mechanic, like with a reward other than narrative, and but this could be like, yeah, this could be I think it should be tied with some like reward, like, yeah, you like, I don't know which example, what game it was, but I'm pretty sure there was some of the game like you just romance some companion, and then that companion has a better gun, or that companion gives you a better gun or something like that.
Oh, interesting. In the end of Mass Effect 2, when they have the suicide mission sequence, I think right before you go, that's when the final cutscene comes with whoever you've been romancing. But I wished it could have also been like, what if the person you were romancing was also the person you chose to lead the second squad, or the person you chose to be the bomb expert, or to go into the tunnels or whatever? Because you have to start assigning roles in that point, and it would have been fascinating if they come, like Jack comes to your room and starts crying, for example. And it would have been fascinating if she came in and she was just like, I'm scared that I can't do it. The thing that you picked her for, like, why did you make me the bomb thing? It should have been Tali. She knows how to do all this technical stuff, like something like that. That would have been really fascinating. Interesting, especially, and then she like comes into your arms and you're there like, baby, don't worry, like whatever you say. But my point is, there's all these opportunities to show how the romances would affect the narrative that really get missed, that I think that people who are just romantically minded when writing the narrative
Hmm.
would have gotten. So like when Emily, you mentioned Emily Buck earlier, when she and I were talking, for example, about the scenes with Batman and Catwoman, she was like telling me about the things that she tried to put in there. And also she was telling me a bit about unfortunately what's not going to be coming out in like the next Walking Dead and stuff like that. And so yeah, she told me about some of those things and how she was trying to show them in the game. And that's one of the reasons why I like her work, because I care about this sort of thing and she's someone who clearly wants to take action.
Yeah.
But yeah, those moments get super interesting. Not when you like pick the flirty thing and we kissed, but when it's like, how are all the ways in which this could have gone right or wrong based on the other things that have happened in the story? Because when we're in those actual situations in real life, like when Batman and the Catwoman, you know, like, so if me and someone I'm attracted to, we're in my room and I'm not sure how they feel about me, but I'm thinking, is this going to be my chance to maybe try to kiss or whatever? You're feeling nervous, you're anxious, you're not really positive what to say or when's the right moment. If you do ask or do say something, you're not always sure how to read their response. Like, and I wished more of that feeling was in the game, in games in general.
Yeah.
For me to be like, what if it's like, if you want to romance a certain character, you can totally kiss them, but kind of you have to do it at the right time. Because if you're
Yeah.
tactless about it, you're gonna be like, what the? Why are you fucking kissing me? We just got back from the suicide mission, and you know, like all this kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
I am interested in that. I don't
Yeah.
want I don't want the game to just be like sex, and you go, yes, please. Like,
Hmm.
give the other people some agency. Show the consequences, the the potential negative consequences of your actions.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point because this might be the actual like part of the split between the narrative reward and the game reward. Because usually with the game design things, you usually have clear understanding. You do something and you will be rewarded with a certain thing, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And in terms of like romance, the whole point of it is just you have to go out on a limb. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen right now.
Yes, yes. It's exactly what I said in my talk. I was like, we get these kindness tokens, so you can just FAQ the you know what to do, and that's all you need. I was like, but in the real world, I'm like terrified when I go on a date. I'm just like, and I wish we could get some of that uncertainty. And
Hmm.
it's hard to do that. How do you make a romance system that can't just be Googled? And those, I have ideas for that, and I've been hoping to connect with the right people to maybe jam out my idea of systems to think, can this be expanded and later on put in a game? Because I want to give people that feeling where they're not positive what's going to happen, but they want to take a shot because they're interested in this person.
Hmm.
And I want the game to make them feel like it's not guaranteed that there's going to be a romance just because they agreed with them on something and gave them a present.
Yeah. And to be fair, you can probably FAQ almost everything. People will still figure out how the system works on the line, but you can do it more complex way. And like, there is a floating point, right? Between let's say there are like two counters, two variables, basically going from 0 to 100, the usual ones.
Mhm.
And across the game, like you are just managing these two counters in some ways. Like you say something, the counter goes up. You say something, the counters go down. People just like it or not. And maybe something underlying. And then there is a certain point at which, like, of these two counters that has to be in this particular small equilibrium, at which point you can kiss that person.
Yeah,
And only
yeah.
then will it work. You can still sort of FAQ this stuff, but then there might be also a bunch of problems that can arise out, so that they just this equilibrium just falls out, and it's no longer possible. The person just moves on, sort of, because the time also comes into question, becomes more complex.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. It would be very interesting if, let's say, the game, you make a certain decision, the game flags it, and they're going to keep that in
Hmm.
mind for another decision later. It would be very interesting if there were multiple, if it's like depending on which flags will tell which is the right situation to make which moves.
Hmm.
Um, Otherwise, because if you don't have certain flags, then the game is like, why are you doing this here? This is going to feel too soon for your romance option or whatever.
Hmm.
Something like that would be interesting, where it's not like, oh, in this scene, make sure to do these things, but more like, if you did these things and these things, this is now the opportunity for this.
Hmm.
It is not if you did this or did not do this. Get some of that combination in there.
It might
because
also
they
be
do have it.
several. Oh, sorry, yeah, continue.
All I was going to say was because they already have that a little bit with your companions, like Rex coming out and being like, I don't know, Shepard. Dragon Age does a similar thing in the first one where um, you go in when you do the dwarven quest and there's this big magical anvil or whatever, and if you have the rock golem with you,
Sheila.
she'll yeah, Sheila, she will leave if you make the wrong decision, you know.
Hmm.
So I'm like, they're already thinking about stuff like that outside of the context of romance. We can start bringing those similar ideas into the romance part of the game, because usually, like I said, it's just kindness tokens, so it's just like, yes, it happened, or no, it didn't.
Hmm.
But complicate that narrative, because that's interesting.
Yeah, it also might be several entry points. Actually, yeah, it's like actually more game designing. But there might be several entry points, sort of. Like there is, let's say there is a bar of like mutual respect and sexual tension, right? Which
Mhm.
is like both of them are equally important. But like if there is a lot of sexual tension in the beginning, right? They see each other, they think they're both hot, and they just like want to sleep with each other.
Yeah.
And then you do that, but you can't move it forward because the mutual respect is not there, and you just want to go your separate ways. But
Right.
then, when the mutual respect grows back, grows further, you may rekindle this thing, and then there is two entrance point, and you do not like lock out of this branch of story essentially, to put it heartlessly, just because you made a wrong decision at some
Right.
point. You can
Right.
sort of come back to this stuff.
They try to do something a little bit like that with Morrigan in the first Dragon Age, where she is probably the character that is the quickest to sleep with you. And it's quite
Mhm.
funny. I think it's kind of like when you go over to her and she has her hands together like this and she goes, it's so cold and lonely in my tent, you know? And it's like very clear that she's like, and then afterwards, if she says, she's like, I had a good time. And if you're like, but do you love me, baby, or whatever? She's like, whoa, what? You know, she says that. She's like, why are you talking to me about that? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
she's not into it, you know? And I like that they did that. But it also, like you said, it doesn't lock you out. There could have been the romance with Morgan is actually one of the most interesting ones in that game. In fact, the storyline with Morgan in general is quite
Mhm.
interesting in the series, but especially because of how it comes back to Morgan in the end of the game,
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And that's also one of those romances that you get to live out, but doesn't get the happy ending no matter what you want. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and I thought it was quite. If you follow the romance with Morgan, which I did, she at one point she's like, I want to give you this ring, and she explains to you the significance of giving you the ring. And if you say I don't want it, that's like the worst decision you can make in the game. It's like the one moment in which she's truly showing you vulnerability, and you
Mhm.
have to take it. If you don't, she's like, I don't even want to fucking speak to you anymore. I remember it's like -80, like you go all the way down. She's borderline ready to leave the party, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I thought it was very. They did a lot of like things that were not tropey
Mhm.
in the romance with Morgan, and that's why to me it was one of the more interesting ones that was happening in the series.
I sort of what kind of came to mind. Have you seen Firefly?
Yeah, I have.
So in Firefly,
They have
there is
that
a
whole
moment.
thing. Yeah, yeah. Go on.
No, I probably come from a different direction. There is a point when Mel gets married to a con artist,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. I remember that one. Yes.
Jane, oh shit, Jane is his name. Yeah, Jane, the soldier essentially in the party. He is
Yeah.
trying to exchange his Vera.
Gun!
This is a kindness token basically, but the value of Vera for Jade is incredible. Well, I mean, there is a lot of this problematic situations with that. Basically, he's exchanging the gun for a person. But this could be nice if there's the same kindness token, right? It would be something like like you have to give a gun or a weapon that you've spent 40 hours with, fighting with, or something like that. Just sort of the gun with the best attunement or something. Like this is literally the best weapon for you. You'll love it, and you give that away as a sign of love and adoration. In this regard, like you just feel like should feel like Jane basically giving Vera away.
There could be a scene where like someone's fallen off a cliff and you could catch them, or you could catch your gun, or whatever, like something like that.
Oh
Like it
yeah,
Yeah, you never know. There's always opportunities to do something like that where you're just like, oh crap, and you save them, but then your gun falls and you're like, damn it,
Mhm.
I did all the enchantments and I added all the things and everything, but you wanted the romance option, like
It's actually a good application of kindness system, but with different spin on it. Because it's essentially you give something for romance, but then again you give it in a different situation.
exactly. You don't just like gift it or something.
Yeah,
You're like, yeah, you're giving something away with a different significance. That's actually an interesting spin on kindness tokens. Because
yeah, yeah,
at that point, is it a kindness token? It's a token, but is it a kindness token anymore?
yeah.
Uh, that's very interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, and also like just the whole scene basically. If somebody like shows you this affection, like basically with Vera telling everything about Vera, and basically, oh my, the scene is so fucking beautiful.
It's really
I
because
freaking
when
love
he
it.
comes out, there's this shot where you think Nathan Fillion, I forget the commander's name, but he
Mel,
was it Mel?
Mel.
Malcolm Reynolds.
Oh, it's Mal. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Malcolm Reynolds. So Mal, like when he first comes when Jane comes in, you think it's about like shit's about to go
Mhm.
down. You think he's about to shoot Mal or something like that. Like, you know
Yeah.
what? All this. I don't know whatever. And he goes, but this is my most prized gun. And I would give it to you for, and it's just like, and Mal's just like, what? Like, like,
Yeah.
and he's like mad that he's been betrothed or whatever, He's like,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's amazing, and all the miscommunication that happens in this particular episode is amazing.
he sees her again later in the season, right? When
Yeah,
she's
she
trying to
tries to
con
con him
someone else.
again.
Yeah.
There's actually also the consequences to your own actions. Like I still can't like get rid of this sense of bringing into a mission was like in Mass Effect, not the suicide mission, but general like very important mission. Somebody who really hates your guts now because like you've been together, but you also slept with like I don't know all of this person's friends, and
Yeah.
like she literally just wants to kill you. She does not articulate it to you, but she clearly just wants to, at one point, just take 3 martinis and a knife and cut your veins while you sleep. And now there is a mission, and like it's just like one bullet in the back of the head during the shootout. Nobody will ever notice, something like that. And this is just the consequences of of like basically toxic actions that you take. It's still playing out a fantasy, but it's also like, yeah, this is what usually happens.
Yeah, it would be amazing if like you were, because there's usually the dialogues, let's say in like Mass Effect, using some of the same examples, the dialogues between the party members usually happens, for example, like in the elevator or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, there's a number of things that they all shout during combat. Um, like I remember, what's the Solarian's name? Morden. So
Mhm.
yeah, where he yells like not flammable or something like that, or like, oh no, he goes, or like not difficult. He yells, he's like, they're like yelling all this random stuff throughout the combat. I was thinking, why don't they yell stuff to each other? And like you just said, if Shepard is in a bad way with someone, like, if he's like, I'm under fire, and then Jack is like, you're like, good, or like, I was just like, why do they keep missing? Like all these opportunities to show. And I understand when studios are like, oh, do you realize how much work it would take to implement those stuff? Yeah,
It's
totally.
actually not. It's actually not. There's a weird thing. It's just there is a talk by Alan Ruskin from Valve about the system from Portal, Left 4 Dead, and I think they use it somewhere else also, which is basically a dynamic conversational system that they use, which is it's a lot of context and you have to voice over this stuff, but it's so simple in terms of not implementation but execution that it allows for a bunch of complex stuff. We kind of started using it on one of the projects, and it's basically, yeah, for those barks situation, you just have this trigger and you react to this trigger, and it allows a lot of stuff. Back then, there are like a bunch of MOOCs, but I'm still curious to do it on something more, like a squad of 6 people tied together, or like doing this stuff, even like in the usual combat situation. But also the elevator, right? The long ass Mass Effect 1 elevator that
Yeah,
everybody hates.
yeah.
Just imagine a moment you're in an elevator, you're riding up. I think there are not enough characters for that too, though in Mass Effect 1. But like they just realize something in the elevator. It's a long ass elevator, and then they just shut up after they realize that somebody has been lying to somebody. And then the whole elevator just becomes super interesting because you just basically, oh shit, please don't kill each other. Please don't kill each other now. I know something in this regard.
Um, in general, those were actually some of my favorite moments when you would see the people you chose interacting with each other.
Hmm.
Um, there was it was like some of the best flavor text essentially.
Hmm.
Not taking into but the thing is they usually discuss what's happening in the world and not what's happening amongst the team members. And that was usually the most interesting. It's why a lot of people like Mass Effect 2 the most, because it was a very personal story and everyone looked forward to coming back to the ship and talking to all the crew members.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but in the third one, when it got more global and they were just kind of like Harry Potter style killing everybody off, or like season finale style, I guess I should say,
Yeah.
just killing everybody off. I don't think it hit home with a lot of people in the way that the second one did, because it felt personal.
Yeah.
The third one tried to cash in on what you did in the third one and the second one.
Third one did actually do some good stuff. Like I don't like Mass Effect 3. It does feel like a season finale that just blasé and does not know what the series is about. But there was a moment with Mordian Solus with his sacrifice that was extremely powerful because, like,
I was about to say the one I do like though, and it's that one especially. So I realized that I think it's possible to save him, but yeah, when I played it, I didn't. He goes up into the tower and he
mhm,
starts singing like he did in the second one, and I
yeah,
thought that was like the most evocative cash in. I was like, all right, well done. Like it was a very good throwback.
yeah, that
So
was good job. And actually, Dragon Age did Dragon Age 1 does things with Alistair and Morrigan specifically. If you take them into a party and just walk around with them, they start banter and they start bickering with each other, which is like also one of the best examples. Or Liliana talking with a dwarf, and the dwarf is like a little bit pervy, and how Liliana just sort of knocks him around, like
yeah,
just deflects all the stuff because like Liliana knows the shit at this point. There was a lot of character development in Dragon Age 1, but I think there's also a good commentary on the deterioration of the narrative in Dragon Age and Mass Effect.
it's amazing. Those I really like. I have a lot of shit to give those games, but they were also they did try to pioneer the thing that they're doing,
Yeah.
which is also why I want to see them be the ones to change it.
Hmm.
It was a little disappointing to see the same system in all parts, in all installments of the game.
Hmm.
I mean, there are changes in how the dialogues happen, but each time it was like kindness tokens. And that
Hmm.
was disappointing. And in the second one, especially, I remember the first time I played it, I romanced Meryl, and she moves into your home, and her suit turns white, and that's the end of your relationship. Like,
Hmm.
like it was just like you did it, and that's like I said, one of the things that drives me nuts. I'm like, no, I want that relationship to become a part of the game. I worked for that, not for the boring cutscene where you don't get to see us really having sex. Like,
Hmm. I
um,
think they did because I don't like Dragon Age 3 at all. It feels very much MMO-ish. But the character Sarah, which is basically an elf with sort of no allegiance to nobody and with a like very weird elf. The whole relationship with her was quite interesting. Also, it sort of starts with the sex real fast, but then sort of she just kind of supports you and shit, and like in a different like small moments. But I mean, come on, she still supports you and shit, and this is very nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I think we need to start wrapping up. Masha, do we have any questions from the chat?
No, I think everybody listens just for your speaking about Mass Effect and Dragon Age.
Right. Shit, there's usually questions to wrap up.
Well, do you have a question for me? And I could pitch one back to you if we want to do some wrap up. I mean, we went through a lot of really interesting
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I'd say, like for me, it feels like one of the things that we kept coming back to were missed opportunities,
Mm,
because clearly there are a lot of great game writers writing a lot of great games, and one of the things that we think is lacking the most is when they get into romance, and that's often because there's currently a standard, and the standard is the kindness token systems. So I'd like to see more people getting vocal about their visions for change, for example. And a lot of what I've said here today is essentially like, yeah, if there's gonna be a romance, then fucking put it in the story. Don't just like be like, oh, we have this mechanic where you can see sex in the end if you want. Like put it in the
mhm.
story. That's the part I actually want to see.
Yeah, not a reward, but an actual integration. That would be yeah, good point. And I
Yeah.
think Anthem completely removed the romance right now. The next Bioware thing. But there is also Waylanders from Emily Grace. Well, not Emily Grace Bach per se, but from Gato
But
Studios.
yeah, and she is writing. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She I can't can I actually? I was gonna be like, I can't say, but I'm like, wait, maybe I can. Like, she was telling me a little bit of like some interesting things that are going to be happening in the romance. So I am very much looking forward to seeing how it pans out because yeah, I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing over and over again, which is why when something catches my attention, like my heart goes out to it. Florence was great. The thing I pointed out in Shadow of the Colossus was a cool thing. The missed opportunity with Samara on Mass Effect 2 was interesting up until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And since I believe in Emily's work, so for whoever's watching, Emily Grace Buck, great writer, and now working with Gato, and I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in Waylanders. So Waylanders obviously is also, by the way, spiritually kind of a successor to Dragon Age. So
Yeah, yeah.
so people who are, if you're into that kind of world and lore, stylistically, I imagine there are going to be some things that will appeal to the same kinds of players, which is another reason why I think I'm going to like it.
Yeah, there's also one of the rare situations when, like, they're Spanish and they're writing about Iberian Celts, which is
Yeah,
also like quite interesting. Just to,
it's very cool.
and I think Emily right now is like on a research trip in Spain.
He literally just messaged me. She wanted me to say hi to you. Like, kisses to you both. So Emily, who, yeah, she's in Spain right now as we speak. She's literally been like going around being in the place that they're writing about, because a lot of the locations in the game are taken from actual locations in the world, which is very
Yeah,
cool. And I'm
yeah,
looking forward to like playing in that like real world essentially.
and it's a good research, and it might also be that we just don't give enough research to these dialogue situations, to these romance and friendship in general. Like, it's not only romance, just friendship also could use a little bit
Intimacy.
betterment.
I believe that people should be able to show how intimately you can be involved with people, and it doesn't have to be romantic. Like, even like, I'm just thinking, how come Shepard didn't, like, Shepard doesn't hug like his crew members? They're going on a suicide mission. Why isn't there a moment of him and Grunt like, oh, you and me, we're doing it? They push their foreheads together. Some Krogan tradition where before the battle they pound chests or whatever. But there's all these opportunities like that to show like we are comrades. Like, and I think and also there's other kinds of intimacy that are not romance. So I would be interested. I'd super be interested in seeing someone showing care for someone they care about because they care about them, not because they are looking to partner up or have sex or whatever.
Oh, we are both are trying to survive here. So, like Mad Max Fury Road, basically, the relationship between Furiosa and Max. It's basically, yeah, okay, we're both trying to survive. We have one mission. Let's support each other. Just no words, no nothing. The whole relationship is just, yeah, okay, just, yeah, you need a gun. Here, have a gun. We don't need to even speak about it. Again, it's again cohesion of sorts. Like, you just
Yeah,
sort of.
and I think pulling off the cohesion is really the ultimate challenge. It's not just like getting it all in there, but making it feel cohesive.
Actually, a random example just in what cohesion is XCOM War of the Chosen, where they, like, the whole idea of an XCOM is just basically to build your relationship between you and your crew, so that when they are dead, you are sad, which
Yeah.
they do brilliantly. And they do the photo booth, and they added the soldier bonds. And that part is basically you reach them, like, you just send them on the same mission, and this is just the bond. There's no description of what they're doing. There's just a picture, and that's it. And you get some more gameplay mechanics out of that. But also, when one of them dies, you're like, fuck, shit, I left this person alone. Oh my god. Also,
Yeah.
like, very simple thing, but very powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know when Enemy Unknown came out, XCOM Enemy Unknown, I mean, where there's like the hardcore mode. So when you lose players, they really characters, they really die. And I remember someone telling me, because it wasn't it wasn't that often. You'd get these like these grunts, and then they would get specializations. And if you were lucky, one of them became a sniper, you know? And someone was telling me about playing on that mode, and he's like, so when the sniper dies, it hurts so bad, you know? Like, and that's amazing design. And
Oh yeah.
I was never one to play games like hardcore. Like, you know, a lot of people have to play Diablo hardcore. So when you die, you really die. And I was playing Grim Dawn with a friend, and he convinced me we should play it hardcore. He's super into that. I'm not, but he's like, no, because what's the point, you know, if it's not hardcore? Like, make it feel real. Make the consequence feel like heavy. Put some actual fear in you when you play. And I played a hardcore all like dozens of levels into the game, and he's right. I enjoyed it so much more because it felt like the consequence was so real. But I also understand that if you're playing this game, you don't want to get 30 hours in and then have to start over. You know, I completely understand that. But it's wild because it did. There was a like now when like my health was low, it was like actually scary. You know, I was like, oh shit, like a, you know, panic mode or whatever.
Oh yeah.
That's an interesting thing because horror games, they try to give that to the player intentionally. It's one reason why they put scary sounds in certain places, because they know that players don't perform the best when audio is like essentially distracting the player. And horror games do that intentionally to make the game more challenging and to make you feel panic and experience I'm just running into a wall now, you know, because you don't know what to do. And if you also go back to like, you know, what you were just saying about the bonds, it's kind of like there's going to be a narrative in the game, even if you didn't write one. So it's very cool when you can give space for the narrative that the player has created to show itself, to manifest itself cohesively with the narrative that's in the story. And that's one of the reasons why I keep saying like, but wouldn't it be so cool if we made this decisions and then these things happened in the game? Because we want to see our narrative marry the narrative of the actual game.
I'm actually thinking that XCOM in their next iteration, because like this is just the direction that XCOM was heading into, just making you mourn the loss of a soldier even more every time.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that at some point they will just add that, okay, these two soldiers that you have been running around with, they just fell in love, and now one of them is dead, and it's your fault, or something like that. It's got to be bound to happen at some point in XCOM. And
I'd be super into that, you know.
Yeah, and also on that topic of XCOM, I showed it to like back in like 4 years ago when the XCOM Enemy Unknown. I showed it to, actually gifted it to my ex-girlfriend who was completely not into video games. She was more into movies. And like she was skeptical about video games in general because like the stereotype is usually like it's just violent combat and stuff like that. So I gave her XCOM Enemy Unknown, and it's changed her perception a little bit because like I gifted it to her, not for birthday or something like that, just randomly.
Hey babe, I know you hate games. Here's Enemy Unknown.
Yeah, just to be more like me. But yeah, I've sent it to her, and like 2 days later, like I get a phone call at like 2 a.m. She just basically said, "What the hell is going on the mission? Like 4 of my people died, and like there was a lot of like crying and a lot of emotional involvement." And she actually completed XCOM Enemy Unknown after that because
no way. That's
because
cool.
of the emotional involvement.
Yeah, that's very. It reminds me. Bree Code does a talk called Love Drugs, also one called Video Games Are Boring, and in that one, she tells us anecdote. What'd you say?
Lydia Dine?
Yes, exactly, and how that affected her cousin. So it's quite telling, and also relating to what you said, like, oh, my ex-girlfriend didn't really know about you know what games were. Her cousin in that moment realized, oh, you can have emotional attachments to characters. So
yeah. And if you talk just heartlessly, if you just talk heartlessly in terms of marketing, this is just it broadens your audience.
Yes,
you know?
yes, exactly what I was about to say. That's exactly what I was about to say. That these are people who aren't playing games because they don't realize that's possible. If we just focus a little bit on that and pitch it to them, people will come through and they'll try the games. And next thing you know, you find someone getting in love with having a companion.
Even with Lydia, who everybody just ignores because it's Lydia.
Yeah, it's funny that Lydia was the one that she cared about so much. You know, like
Oh, another example. Actually, oh shit. We talked with Chris Avalon about this. Dog Meat from Fallout 1.
Right. Yeah.
The best companion.
But Dogmeat is also in Fallout 3, right?
Yeah, but they
But
don't count. No, I mean the first dog meat that you can't pet, that you can't interact anyway. It's just very good in combat, and it's a lovable like mutt, and that's it. And everybody is so ridiculously attached to a dog meat. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. There's also an article about Skyrim and how there's like a story with a dog whose owner passes away, and so you like kind of adopt. Yeah, and this guy tells the whole story. He's like, "Well, I'm not a monster. I couldn't leave the dog." You know, like it's amazing. Those games, they give a lot of space for our narrative as well, and that's something a lot of people really like to see in their games. So
it actually might be a good argument in case of like just removing this story, because dog meat was never intended to be so. XCOM soldiers were intended, but not to that extent. I'm assuming, at least in the terms of XCOM and also you just if you remove the scripted narrative of romance and of involvement of relationship, it just sprouts out just because you like your imagination has to feel this thing. And also like, but this dog, I'm not an animal. I will kill the entirety of a city, but I will keep my dog alive.
yeah, exactly. Too fun.
I think that's a perfect point to wrap up. We've been running for an hour and a half. So
thank you for having me. This was really cool. And obviously, I have a lot to say about the narratives in games, and like follow us on the internet and all that stuff. You know, like
yeah. How can people find you on the internet, Elie?
if people want to follow me and keep up in touch with any of my work, a lot of it is well, there's a lot of I do a lot of very different things in games. But if you want to follow any of my work, Twitter is probably the best way, and it's at Elie Abraham 64, and Elie is spelled ELIE. So that's where I'm talking about what I'm working on, et cetera, and hopefully in the first half of next year, there will be the DLC of Dandara coming out, which is actually going to really change the game. For anyone who hasn't played this game, by the way, it's a really awesome narrative Metroidvania, and part of the work I'm doing right now is really brushing up the vanilla version of the game. So even people who've already played the game, I think, would re-enjoy it even more once the DLC has dropped. So
yeah,
that's some of what to expect on my end.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Zhenya.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to get back to that. I love talking to you about this stuff. Like,
same. Really, this was fun.
Yeah, the green room in Sweden was like the best experience of this Sweden Game Conference. Of just like, just clear and completely rampant. I just wish somebody had a video camera for this part.
Yeah, would have been funny.
Yeah, just the whole half-an-hour conversation about the snow and Frostpunk.
I was just about to say, yeah, we just went on, but they got the snow perfectly. Like,
oh yeah.
That was super.
Yeah. So okay, bye with auditory, and we may continue after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so thank you again, and good night to everybody. And I guess I'll take my leave now.